Some of the sneaky Pete of it has been disclosed on Twitter and written about in the press, but I will fill in some details here. On the evening of Friday, December 18th, Sidney Powell, Mike Flynn, a sharp female attorney on Sidney's team whom I will call Alyssa, and myself, decided to call an SUV and get driven to the entrance that serves the Eisenhower Executive Office building, which is on the grounds of, and connects to, the White House. We had a vague plan regarding how we were going to get through all the rings of Capitol Police, Secret Service, and Marines without any invitation. Sidney and Mike were the center of global attention, and we were going to try to use that to bullshit our way past them all and get to the Oval Office. Beyond that, we'd be playing it by ear. I did say the plan was vague. There was a fine young NSC staffer whom I had gotten to know, a real mensch, and I called him and left a message that I was accepting the open offer he had extended to drop by his office anytime, and was coming over right then. At 6:15 p.m. Not knowing if he would play ball, I may have been less than clear that there would be some people with me. We were dropped off a block from the security gate, and walked through the light snow falling in the darkness. We got to the first security booth, and Sidney and Mike approached to talk. The police and Secret Service saw it was General Flynn, the People's General, and stiffened to attention. There was no appointment scheduled, but they clearly were confused and trying to figure out what to say. Suddenly my staffer buddy came out from inside, and when he saw Flynn and Sidney he froze and looked at me with raised eyebrows. I gestured that we were all together, and he looked shocked for a moment. Then did the right thing, strode over to the guard, flashed his ID, and asked him to let us all in, even though none of the requisite paperwork was arranged. With apparent relief the guards quickly said, "Take care, General," and we were through the first layer. For the second layer my staffer buddy and another of his colleagues who had joined up walked into the inner ring entrance before us, and spoke for us. Again, when they saw Mike the guards again all stiffened to attention. Looked puzzled for a moment. I think there is no such thing as a high-level visitor like that coming in without it being in the books. Then professionally and methodically processed us all through as quickly as they could, without. They were silent and asked no questions, apparently guessing we might not have many good answers if they did. I was the last one through, and as they handed my ID back to me one leaned in and said quietly and courteously, "Thank you, Mr. Byrne." I was surprised. And it was the first time I understood that in the firmament of Michael Flynn and Sidney Powell, there was a faint little star of my own. We were ushered inside to an office, to use as base camp. If I recall correctly, we were in base camp for about 30 minutes before making a move for the office of another NSC staffer, another young and principled person, with an office closer to the Oval Office. Camp 2. Once there, Mike Flynn made contact with someone with whom he had worked in his brief stint as National Security Advisor. Someone with an office that could serve as Camp 3, from which would come the final assault on the summit, the Oval Office. "Hey, yes, it's Mike. How you been? Oh my gosh, so great to hear your voice too. Yeah, it was unbelievable. Where am I? Oh, actually I'm in the White House. Yeah, just came by to see me? Sure, well how about I just swing by? Sure, see you in a moment." We launched for Camp 3, and sure enough, when we got there, as Mike Flynn stood talking to his former colleague, Sidney, and I had a 20-foot line of sight down into the empty Oval Office. After a few minutes, through a private door on the far side, Donald Trump walked into the Oval Office. Sharp suit and tie, still, at 7:30 p.m. He came through and glanced out the doorway, to where Sidney Powell and I were already walking towards him, greeting him like he should be expecting us. President Trump's eyebrows knitted in puzzlement, but his face showed he recognized us, and after a moment he beckoned us in. Within seconds General Flynn, Sidney Powell, and I were all sitting in the Oval Office with President Donald J. Trump, with the door shut behind us. So that's how that happened, really. The president sat across the resolute desk and made small chat with Mike, asked him how he'd been. It had been almost 4 years since they had seen each other, when Flynn had left the White House, weeks into Trump's first term. He asked after Sidney as well. I gave and received no more than a nod, letting Mike and Sidney take the lead. As I have noted publicly, the first thing I noticed about him was how measured, gracious, and even soft-spoken Trump seemed to be. So unlike the character that has beamed at us for years through the media. Eventually he glanced at me again, raised an eyebrow, and gave a small chuckle. Apparently he knew about me, as I thought might be the case. He said something quietly, civil, and kind. I said, "Thank you, Mr. President." He cocked his head quizzically and said something softly about knowing that I had not voted for him, and had said a number of critical things of him. Some of them harsh. I let him know the truth, that I had said some unkind things before the 2016 election, but while he was president my estimation of him had grown, and that in any case none of it mattered, because I was confident the election had been hacked. I told him, "We think there is a much shorter route through all of this than your team is pursuing." I closed saying, "But sir, entrepreneur to entrepreneur, I feel I must mention something. As you may know, I have been swimming around the outside of your administration for a couple months now, and I must tell you, I do not think you are being well served by many people in the White House. I can bring in young staffers who will tell you that some of your senior leadership don't want you to win. They want you to concede." The president raised his eyebrows at my frankness. Then, like a man who knew the answer, he asked quietly, "Why?" "I'm not sure," I said, "but I hear everyone is getting signals that if they're good boys, and get you out the door, there will be jobs waiting for them. But if they don't, they won't be getting offers from the right law firms, they won't be getting invitations from the right country clubs. They won't be getting invited to the socialist parties on Long Island." Trump grimaced slightly and we moved on. Sidney and Mike began walking the president through things from our perspective. In brief, there was a quick way to resolve this national crisis because he had power to act in ways that could resolve things. Under an executive order that he had signed in 2018, and another executive order that President Obama had signed in 2015. He could find that there was adequate evidence of foreign interference with the election, and though doing so would give him authority to do a number of big things. All he had to do was one small thing. Direct a federal force, we suggested U.S. Marshal Service and National Guard, to go to the 6 counties in question, the problematic 6, and recount the paper ballots that were held as fail-safe backup. It would only take a few days. Even more conclusive would be if they imaged the hard drives and those images could be examined forensically, which would make the project last no more than a week. As we had already cracked the Antrim County machines and knew precisely what to do going forward. In either case, if there was no mischief found, then President Trump would concede the election. But if, as we suspected, evidence of hundreds of thousands of improper votes was found, in each of the 6 counties in question, then he would have a wide variety of options. He might have those 6 states recounted. Or he might just skip that and have the National Guard rerun the elections in those 6 states. We pointed out that, it being December 23rd, if he signed the paperwork we had brought with us, we could have the first stage, recounting in the problematic 6 counties, finished before New Year's Eve. And even if the result was hinky enough it demanded a rerun of the election in those states, it could be done before January 20th, so that the January 20th constitutional deadline would not be disrupted. The more time that he let slide by, the more compressed things would become. If he waited to see what the January 6th outcome was, however, and then decided to follow a plan such as ours, it would engender accusations of sore loserism, so he had to act quickly. The alternative was an election that 47% of Americans doubted, which would not go down peacefully. "You know, Pat," he said to me, "funny, the only people who call me Pat are either friends from childhood, or men from a background like my own family's." You know, he caught my eye and gave a little snort of humor. "You know, I could leave here and my life would be really good. I could be with my family, my good friends, I could be on the golf course." We looked at each other and shared a moment as may occur only with CEOs and other leaders. People think our lives are glamorous, but in many ways they are quite unpleasant. I had a little flashback, the first time I was running a firm, a 24-person manufacturer of industrial torch tips in New Hampshire, I went on a sales trip to Europe. Some great colleagues, engineers, and I spent a couple weeks of crawling around on plasma machines in a shipyard in Spain, a crane manufacturer in Belgium, knocking on factory doors in Hamburg. Then attending a gigantic conference in Essen so we could walk around getting business cards and grabbing people to sit with us for a bagel to hear a sales pitch because we could not afford our own booth, but we needed a big order so we could make payroll the next quarter. After a few weeks of it we were home to New Hampshire, being received by colleagues like we were jet-setting royalty. Oh Spain! How was Spain? Belgium? Germany? Gosh, I always wanted to travel. What was it like? That's when I realized that people often do not understand how it is generally not nearly as fun as people think. Being in such leadership position, dreaming of taking it easy, of being able to take a walk without worrying about, in my case at the time dozens, in Trump's case, hundreds of millions, of people depending upon you. I understood why Trump was chuckling, and I nodded and chuckled along with him. I got just what he was saying. A piece of him was thinking that from a personal, 74-year-old's, standpoint, leaving the White House and going to Florida and golfing had a real appeal. So Pat, on January 20th I could walk to Marine One and climb aboard and go have a really nice life, he continued, talking softly to me. But this, knowing I was cheated, that they rigged this election? How can I just walk away from that? Other than that, of that first 20 minutes we had alone with the president, most of the conversation was among the president, Mike, and Sydney. So I had a lot of time to watch and study President Trump, and I was surprised on many fronts. When he questioned Sydney's legal reasoning that he had the power to do such a thing, she pulled out the executive order he had signed in 2018 and described one from Obama in 2015. Trump took the EO and scanned it quickly, then began asking pertinent questions from it. The same with the finding that he would need to sign. He asked questions of both Sydney, regarding legalities, and Mike, who discussed with him the kinds of information regarding foreign interference covered in the last chapter. Throughout what I saw was a sharp, executive mind, taking in information quickly and calculating decision trees. It takes a fair bit to impress me that quickly, but what I saw was a sharp mind in action. It surprised me how I had seen no mention of it in 4 years. Finally, Trump stopped and scanned the three of us. "What are you saying?" he asked simply. Thinking of the difference in organization between what I had experienced with Flynn and Sydney, versus the college sophomore bull session approach of the campaign and Rudy world, I spoke up again. "Mr. President, I think you should appoint Sidney Powell your special counsel on these election matters, and make General Flynn your field marshal over the whole effort. I know Rudy's your lawyer and friend, and he can have a great role in this. Rudy should be personally advising you, and we don't want to do anything to embarrass him. But really, it needs to be Sidney taking point legally on this. And if you really want to win, make General Flynn here the field marshal. If you do, I put your chances at around 50 to 75%. You should see how well he has this planned. It would run like clockwork." The president shook me off, saying, No, it's got to be Rudy." Somewhere in that time, 3 lawyers appeared together. They did not introduce themselves, and stood huddling in the back of the Oval Office, listening. In addition, Mark Meadows and someone else had joined us by speakerphone. Eventually the lawyers in the back began muttering things to make their displeasure and disagreement evident. Finally President Trump said something indicating this was new to him, wondering why no one had shown him this route through the impasse. I said again, "Sir, again, CEO to CEO, you are not being served well by those around you in the White House. I've gotten to know people in your White House, and there are people here who want you to concede." This time he stopped himself. "Who?" he asked angrily. "Who wants me to concede?" I was taken aback by his anger, because I thought what I was telling him was generally known. I thought it was generally understood that about half the White House was on the program of getting him to concede. "Sir, I am surprised you're surprised. In your administration your leadership is telling junior staff this everywhere. I am told that this fellow Pat Cipollone, indicating the lawyers behind me as I spoke, not knowing which was Cipollone, has been telling people since November 4th. Just help us get the president to concede. And for the last couple of weeks, Mark Meadows has been telling staff, help get the president into transition mode. Trump turned to White House General Counsel Pat Cipollone, who began sputtering. Mr. President, you know how hard I work, you know how many hours I have been putting in, both of which were mealy-mouthed, and neither of which was a direct denial. As was obvious to everyone in the room. Trump faced him, his face darkening in anger. Sir, I continued, in 30 minutes I can have a number of staffers from within your White House here to tell you that those are quotes from Pat Cipollone and Mark Meadows. This guy is lying to you through his teeth. They want you to lose. Trump turned, knowing I was correct. He indicated one of the other lawyers, said, did you know that this is his last day? He is going to work up the street for a law firm, getting paid 10 times what I can pay him here. He continued wistfully, Pat, can you imagine what I could have gotten done here? If I had not been fighting my own people? Cipollone and the other 2 lawyers scurried out the back door of the Oval Office. I heard them stay out in the ante-room, caucusing. Meanwhile, the president, Sidney, Mike, Alyssa, and myself continued for a while walking through more of the details, reviewing some of what we had said earlier. At some point Alyssa, that quiet but razor-sharp female lawyer assisting Sidney, took over for a few points, and concisely explained this or that aspect of the executive order. Always clarifying with great precision whatever needed to be clarified. After 10 minutes the 3 lawyers walked back into the room and stood, this time not in the back, but abreast and to the left of we 4 visitors. Mike continued taking any operational questions that came in, Sidney and her junior handled the legal questions that arose. The 3 male lawyers edged closer to the front, and then as though as some hidden signal, they all started being bitches. First was some comment about it not being right to use the National Guard. The optics are terrible, Mr. President, said one. It would have to be the DHS. I liked the National Guard idea because we needed to re-establish trust of the American people in the electoral process. And the U.S. institution with the most trust is the one where people wear military uniforms. Yet, the National Guard is local, they are all around us, our colleagues at work, our citizen soldiers. But perhaps in a sign of flexibility, Flynn and Sidney allowed as how one could use the DHS instead of the National Guard. At some point Cipollone thundered, never in American history has there been this kind of a challenge to an election. Flynn responded, never in American history has there been a situation like this. With counting being shut down for hours, foreigners connecting to our equipment. And so on. The press would tear you apart, predicted Pat Cipollone at one turn in the conversation. Sidney said what Mike and I were both thinking, the press is going to tear him apart? Really? What are they doing now? He does not have the authority to do it? Cipollone thundered at some point. Sidney rejoined, of course he does, Pat, citing EO 13848, and something else signed by Obama. Without question he has the authority. Alyssa whipped out EO 13848 again and showed the relevant language that we had just covered. Trump looked at Cipollone with an expression that said, you never even brought this to my attention, Pat. You know, at least they want to fight for me. You don't even want to fight for me. You just tell me everything I cannot do. Around this time Cipollone began getting hot under the collar, and raising his voice to the president, he said, hey, if you want to do this you don't need my permission. You don't even need a pen or a piece of paper. You can just say, I hire Sidney Powell as White House special counsel, and it's done. But then he went on with more objections to everything he was hearing. All of which continued to sound stretched. Even frivolous. After half a dozen of such frivolous objections from the White House General Counsel, Mike and I looked at each other dumbstruck. Mike grew calm and silent, his brow knit in bafflement. Finally I calmly announced to the room, This is the most surreal conversation I have ever experienced. Around that time Alyssa spoke up on a legal point. He clearly had enough grounds to find that those problematic 6 counties had enough peculiarities in their election, that under his powers under those EOs, he was sending in federal teams to recount the ballots in those 6 counties. It was a defensible, reasonable action to take, which she said in legalese. What happened after that would be determined by what was found. But now the 3 male lawyers who were on their feet began speaking to her rudely. That, I would say, is when the conversation became unprofessional. They challenged her, asking something like, "What do you think you know about the law?" She replied, "Well, I am a lawyer. I work for Sydney," and they cut her off, snorting derisively. Flynn sprung to his feet with a grace and ease that surprised me, a surfer getting up on a wave. He turned to face the 3 standing lawyers standing over and barking at the female. In a measured tone of voice, he asked of the 3 lawyers, "Let's get something clear. What do you think happened on November 3rd? Do you think was a fair election? There was nothing unusual about it?" The 3 lawyers looked down, stuck their toes in the dirt, glanced at each other out of the corners of their eyes, and would not give an answer. President Trump looked directly at me. "You know, Pat, all my life I've had the best lawyers. People call me from all over the world. What lawyer should I use on this? What lawyer should I use on that? But here, you know, the other side breaks every rule in the book, but me. All I got are lawyers who tell me you can't do this, you can't do that. Do you see what I have been working with here? Can you imagine what I could have gotten done in 4 years?" He broke off, then turned to Cipollone. "You know, Pat, now speaking to Cipollone, where's my Durham report? Where's?" He started rattling off his legal disappointments. Standing there next to his 2 colleagues, Cipollone started shouting back at Flynn, still on his feet, and at the president. Still shouting, he stepped rudely towards us, standing over, and inappropriately close to, Alyssa from behind. Before I knew it I was on my feet, shoulder to shoulder with Flynn, back mostly to the president, with a mental trigger that if Cipollone moved another inch towards Flynn, Alyssa, or me, I was going to bury my knuckles in his throat. President Trump said, "Hey, hey, hey." We all turned. With both hands waving at us to calm down, and a quarter smile of disbelief on his face, he said, "Hey, calm down." Cipollone turned to storm out the door again, his 2 butt boys in tow. Sydney said, "Let him leave, I'll take the job and you'll win." Trump said after him, "Go ahead, Pat. Leave, don't come back as far as I am concerned." As the door shut, Trump said softly, I don't mean that. You know, Pat's a friend," and his voice trailed off. I winced at the dawning of my understanding. I took another shot at it with the president. "Again, sir, I know that Rudy is a friend of yours, he's wonderful. I love Rudy, I don't want to embarrass him, but you should see how what Mike and Sydney have got going is so organized, so well planned." Again he cut me off, saying, No, it's got to be Rudy on the inside." I slumped. There was a 3rd round where the lawyers came back in to interject themselves into what the rest of us were talking about. A 3rd round of frivolous pushback, but this time in the end it was President Trump who got ticked off, in a weary kind of way, at all the pushback from his own people. The searching for things they could oppose. Again he muttered something to me along the lines of, "Can you imagine what I would have been able to get done these 4 years if I had not had to put up with this?" Finally, when President Trump asked why such and such a course of action Sydney was proposing had not even been explored by Cipollone, the lawyer responded, "Well, we're not the campaign lawyers." I did not even know what the fuck he meant by it, other than that Cipollone was purely obstructionist, clearly coming from a place of, "How do I prevent this?" Trump sighed, and wearily said to Cipollone, "You know, Pat, a few minutes ago you said that I can do it just by saying it. Well, okay. I have decided, now I'm saying it. Sidney Powell is hereby appointed as White House Special Counsel. There, that's it. She needs a clearance. interjected one of the other lawyers. It'll take months to get her a clearance. Flynn spoke up in disbelief. Even I knew how frivolous that objection was. Mr. President, Flynn said, you can do the same thing with a clearance. You can grant any clearance you want, on the spot, verbally. Sadly and defiantly, President Trump looked at his three lawyers and said, I hereby grant Sidney Powell a top-secret security clearance. Again they stormed out of the room. Again the conversation continued amongst the President, Sidney, Mike, Alyssa, and myself. Eventually President Trump said he would take a break, but that we would all meet in 30 minutes up in the living quarters, in the Yellow Oval, I believe the room is called. In the meantime, Rudy was coming in and we had to find a way to make things work between Rudy and Sidney. As we parted he said, there probably has not been a meeting in this room like what just happened, in 200 years. As he was passing out he brushed past me, stopped, and speaking low and quiet, he said something really quite kind and meaningful, showing me that he knew quite a bit more about me than I had guessed. A few minutes later we were in the cabinet room. Sidney, Mike, Alyssa, and I, waiting for Rudy. Mike and I were intent on making sure the meeting went well between Sidney and Rudy, so everyone could work happily together. After 10 minutes Rudy came in, tying his tie, and said in a not too gruff a manner, but with perhaps the gruffness of a man disturbed from his evening meal, you know Sidney, if we are going to work together you have to share information. Sidney immediately told him, I do share information Rudy. You never read your emails, you never read your texts. That's not true Sidney. I just need you to stop keeping me in the dark. Rudy, it is true. Sidney, you have to stop keeping everything to yourself. I cannot work with you if you don't. Within moments the conversation had spiraled out of control. After a minute or two of squabbling I tried to interject something helpful. Mr. Mayor, it is true that since I arrived, everything we ever brought Sidney, she always said, get this to Rudy right away. It's true. Absolutely everything she found, she told us to share with you. She never asked us to keep you in the dark about anything. But it went poorly. Fuming, we all went up to the living quarters of the White House. The president was there, waiting, and after we walked in the three lawyers joined again. Meadows was there as well. A waiter brought out a bowl of small, bottle-cap-sized Swedish meatballs, with share plates. Trump motioned for them to be placed at the small table so that everyone could indulge, but it was the table in front of me, for which I was grateful. For the rest of the meeting there were two and only two people scarfing down meatballs, myself, and the president. I learned later they were his grandmother's recipe. Nobody else had any. I actually keep vegetarian from time to time and was trying to that week, but how often does one sit with the president serving meatballs from his grandmother's recipe? And they were good. They really were. Their meeting continued for a couple hours up in those quarters. No substantial new ground was covered, we just walked through the reasoning we had gone through in the Oval Office, and explained the plan. Trump was decisively on board, and none of the other parties pushed back. Finally, around 12:15 a.m., we all began fading, and wrapped up. We walked outside in the hall, waiting, until the president came out to say goodbye. We each had a moment with him, and again he said something quite meaningful, and quite kind, to me. But we were all exhausted, I think, and glad that the meeting was over. A few minutes later Alyssa, Sidney, Mike, and I were walking on the sidewalk in front of the White House, light snow still falling in the dark. We saw Meadows and Rudy leaving out another entrance and walking away together. We continued in the other direction, elated. With Sidney Powell ensconced as White House special counsel, and Mike providing organizational skills and his vast expertise of matters D.C., we were in good standing. And I believe at that moment we all weighted the chances of our success high. As we walked home in the snow we confided in each other, you know, for me this is not really about Trump. But obviously we cannot let a rigged election stand. If we do, it could mean civil war, and even a Chinese takeover of our country. All we need to do is follow this plan, expose what happened in those 6 counties by checking the ballots. If there is nothing amiss, then Trump gets in his helicopter and leaves, and there's no civil war. But if we find chicanery, it will give an opportunity to blow the scheme up for the whole nation. Who knows how much fraud there is going to turn out to be in American elections? I think a lot. What do you think? Around and around we went, excited for our success in the meeting, like we had been thrown a Hail Mary and caught it in the end zone. After a few blocks our long-forgotten SUV found us in the snow flurries, we got in, and he drove us the rest of the way to the hotel. I had my first good night's sleep in a while. The next day, Saturday, Sidney called Mark Meadows and said, "Well, now that I'm White House special counsel, I am going to need an office over there." Meadows told her, "Yeah, we're looking into that. We don't have anything immediately, but we are going to soon." "Well, then I am going to need a White House ID so I can come and go," replied Sidney. Yeah, well, we are working on that too. There might be a problem with that. We'll see what it is going to take," said Meadows. We all had a terrible sinking feeling, and by Monday or Tuesday, we learned that Sidney's White House special counsel position was not going through. The plan we had discussed so extensively in the White House. The one that got an answer within a few days, and depending upon the evidence adduced either permitted the peaceful transition of power without a civil war being called for, or justified more extensive federal involvement that would get to the bottom of what the intent of the people truly was. That plan had been called off. Instead, Rudy was going to continue his slog through the courts and the hotel room hearings in the states.